The fighting world has delivered some of the greatest warriors to grace the planet in the modern day, but the greatest of the UFC, and likely the greatest weapon in any combat sport, Georges St-Pierre, GSP. It is almost an impossibility to find a fighter who is more complete and brutal than GSP, who dominated the UFC in the welterweight division for almost all of his career, taking down the world's greatest champions on his way to the top of the fighting world, being remembered as the greatest pound-for-pound fighter ever. In this video, we will take a look at the notable performances in the career of Georges St-Pierre, including the 2 historic losses and the best of the legendary 10-win streak of GSP. January 31, 2004, UFC 46. The birth of a king.
5 wins with no losses. Standing 5 feet 10 inches tall, out of Montreal, Quebec, Canada. Please welcome Georges "Rush" St-Pierre.
Despite going 5-0 in Canada, defeating Ivan Menjivar, Thomas Denny, and Pete Spratt, St-Pierre wasn't the fighter with the most excitement prior to his UFC debut. It was judo master Karo Parisyan, who had previously dazzled fans with his grappling before submitting Dave Strasser in his UFC debut.
St-Pierre has been put in many bad situations.
Kyle flipped him over. Can he finish?
Got his arm.
If he can break that arm loose.
This, however, was GSP's night, as he dominated the bout from the start.
Lock a hold of an arm or something. St-Pierre is avoiding it, but he's definitely a judo god. That is his strength. He's right now currently.
And the first time fighting in the States, first time fighting in the UFC, now he's starting to get more comfortable. Now he knows what to expect from his opponent. The 90 seconds remains in round 2. Oh, and a good slam.
Brave Parisyan had his moments in the fight, but St-Pierre's strength and ring acumen helped him avoid severe danger and win easily on the scorecards. This was just the beginning.
Congratulations!
The legendary St-Pierre continued to put the universe on notice. Before asserting his dominance as an elite ground fighter, GSP was an exceptional striker and would utilize his talent to repeatedly disintegrate opponents early in his career.
With the face of St-Pierre.
Oh, nice right hand. He looked a little stunned there.
St-Pierre 2 times.
Nice left hook.
St-Pierre with a good couple of rights. And now
Jay Heron, GSP's next UFC victim, was destroyed with a multitude of punches in round 1, falling to a stoppage 1 minute 42 into the fight. The legendary Matt Hughes rivalry would provide the fighting world with an all-time trilogy that will likely go down as one of the world's great 3-piece events. Hughes is one of the great UFC champions, before clashing with GSP, was 36-4 on his career and arguably was the #1 pound-for-pound fighter on the planet. So much so that in St-Pierre's 7th bout, Hughes had taken care of the unbeaten GSP via a brutal round 1 armbar for the first of GSP's 2 losses in his career.
Saw that straight punch, glance off of round 1 with a flurry, and scores some points. Matt Hughes with a submission, and it's all over! It's Hughes with a submission victory! Bang! Armbar over!
Hughes undoubtedly carried a quiet confidence heading into his second clash with GSP, and was considered the #1 guy in the world. That all changed at UFC 65. Hughes versus GSP 2 wasn't even close.
George goes to the clinch. I mean, George is doing a very nice job here. Nice takedown by George. Just a counter scramble out of that double underhook. And the power of Matt Hughes.
Oh, Superman punch caught him! Proves it's stumble! He's hurt, and the round is over! Round is over!
Unbelievable.
Thinking of it.
Jab of his own. Jab by George. Kick to the head, right to the side of the head.
He's big time hurt with the elbow.
GSP's striking had never looked cleaner or more forceful, and the brutal victory gave Rush his first ever UFC gold. George St-Pierre would become a fatality of what is one of the greatest upsets in UFC history. Matt Serra, at the time of the fight, was a 9-4 fighter who jumped up a division to fight GSP.
And he's willing to perhaps eat. Serra, if you look at those two here, he hurt him again, he hurt him again. He hurt him again. St-Pierre is buckling. Serra buckles St-Pierre. St-Pierre down again. Serra's trying to hold that St-Pierre.
In one of the great shocks of the fighting world, Serra swarmed George with punches and shockingly brutally knocked GSP out in a heroic display that GSP would use as fuel to now run undefeated from this point in his career.
This sport is so crazy.
Serra lost, GSP was forced into a trilogy with Matt Hughes again at UFC 79. The fight tied in one of the great UFC trilogies and was arguably the single most important fight of St-Pierre's career.
Pound St-Pierre. He's in trouble now.
St-Pierre not only rose to the occasion, but he stamped his authority on the welterweight division, with this victory signaling the beginning of a legendary and monstrous 10-fight reign over the division.
UFC 79. Again, another takedown. Hughes wants Serra as well. More of the same so far.
And in one of the great revenge stories, GSP made his opponent submit via the same armbar he lost to in his 7th fight.
Seconds. He's got a Kimura on one side and a possible triangle on the other. Trying to submit Hughes. Not quite yet. And it's George Rush St-Pierre defeats Matt Hughes again.
George!
GSP's reign took its next step with Phase 2 of his revenge role with Matt Serra just 5 months later. Serra had punished George 3 fights previously, but St-Pierre was a more polished fighter by now, and it solidified his position among the greats of the UFC. GSP made it abundantly apparent that this was not the same man that lost to Serra in the first fight. GSP knocked Serra down at will and hammered Matt the Terror Serra's body with his knees in just 2 rounds.
Coming down to the guard of Matt Serra. Nice 1-2 combination. What's surprising me the most, though, is the passing skills. He's not using head movement. He's dropping his hands. He's giving a lot of opportunities for George St-Pierre to work his jab and work his combinations.
It almost seemed like he was just trying to wait for a spot to throw
pass and for those takedowns of George St-Pierre.
His back. 20 seconds remains. More knees by GSP. George St-Pierre.
The conclusion was epic, proving to the world that GSP was back and top of the world for good.
Mentally, will it be George St-Pierre leaving the victor again, or will this be the greatest night of John Fitch's fight?
GSP's performance against John Fitch at UFC 87 was considered the most remarkable of all the fights he won during his career. GSP vs. Fitch remains the textbook example of a GSP performance, exemplifying everything that makes GSP incredible.
He's very wobbly, Mike. Very wobbly. He goes down for a moment. He's in trouble. A fight against the man that St-Pierre considered the greatest challenge.
GSP showed his versatility, hitting Fitch with brutal punches, while on the other hand overwhelming Fitch with his power, agility, and technical competence. St-Pierre didn't get the finish in this bout, instead unleashing 5 rounds of pure torture upon John Fitch. As St-Pierre catapulted himself to the top of the fighting world, the question arose, who could beat GSP? The Hawaiian legend, BJ Penn's well-rounded fighting toolbox raised concerns as his exceptional defense and standing power looked to be a perfect matchup against St-Pierre. The two fighters clashed 3 years earlier in what was a significant victory for George. The result came under question as multiple judges considered BJ Penn the better boxer throughout the fight, GSP winning by an extremely close split decision.
There called the George is out of it.
George Rush St-Pierre.
fought off all 3 of GSP's takedown attempts in round 1, but that was the best the Prodigy could do on this night.
Let's take a look at the replay here.
Penn landed only 4 significant strikes from round 2 until the bout's conclusion between rounds 4 and 5. He also fell victim to all 4 of GSP's takedown attempts.
In another St-Pierre.
And that's why his skills continue to improve. He's not delusional.
And ahead to the 5th and final round. St-Pierre in full control.
The challenger's corner threw in the towel just before the start of round 5, exemplifying how brutally GSP treated the 13-5-1 Penn in this fight. While GSP's battle with Josh Koscheck at UFC 124 was not the most exciting in the sport's history, it wonderfully demonstrated GSP's large skill set.
What he wants to do is keep this fight up. Let's see if that's the case.
Not long.
Oh, he touched him.
Got him with that second jab big time, Joe. Can he stuff it? Yes.
He stuffed it, and Georgie.
After winning his previous 7 fights, GSP chose to forego his ground game in favor of a technical stand-up battle with Koscheck.
Not even close.
Koscheck had no answers, and this bout remains one of GSP's most dominant and best technical fights in his career.
The undisputed UFC.
Many fans and commentators alike questioned what to expect from GSP's octagon return versus Carlos Condit at UFC 154 after a 19-month absence that saw him undergo knee surgery and face copious amounts of criticism. GSP had previously had several slow-paced technical bouts along his bloody reign in the UFC in Thiago Alves, Dan Hardy, and most recently Jake Shields, winning all via decisions. GSP was starting to look like his best and most explosive days were behind him, and he started to firm as a robotic, elite technical fighter. This was a bloodbath that is well worth remembering. Rush hadn't lost in 5 years and 9 fights when he entered the cage with the dangerous Condit. He put him through one of his toughest tests, including severely injuring GSP in the 3rd round with a stunning head kick.
That's a nice head kick. Oh, he got it. Yes, sir. Condit with a big kick to the head. Condit swarming. Condit on top.
GSP took the fight via a decision, but the numbers will never show how vital this victory was for St-Pierre's legacy, firming as one of his top 5 greatest of all time. George St-Pierre would face 26-8 Nick Diaz in 2013. The grudge match between St-Pierre and Diaz leading up to UFC 158 was one of the biggest fights of both men's careers. While St-Pierre was the overwhelming favorite, the fan favorite Nick Diaz had a strong following due to his pressure, boxing, and submission skills on the mat, which may drive St-Pierre into danger.
Stop George to scramble with him on the ground.
In the end, St-Pierre came out on top, dominating the former Strikeforce champion in every round to retain his UFC welterweight title in front of his Canadian fans.
Nick is looking for that Kimura on the right leg, and then at the end.
By 2017, GSP had been out of the ring for nearly 4 years when he opted to compete at middleweight against the then-champion Michael Bisping. Rush had the opportunity to become one of the only men in UFC history to reign over 2 divisions.
Bisping is on the 25-minute championship list 4 times.
Look at that finisher.
Oh, yeah. That got Bisping's attention. Now a spinning attack.
St-Pierre did not disappoint with a convincing victory over the mouthy Bisping, which finished in a 4th round rear naked choke submission. Even after all that time out and jumping up a weight division, GSP appeared to have not missed a beat.
All out for the finish here. George is going to empty the tank against the rope. Is he going to give up the back? It's over. It's over, Joe. It's over, Joe. It's over, Joe.
Has done it! He is the new UFC!
The final bout against the champion Michael Bisping was the exclamation point on the perfect career for arguably the greatest warrior to grace the UFC. And if you enjoyed that video, feel free to like and subscribe to the channel for more fighting sports content.